fantastic. Hey, thanks, Meg, and Drug Science for pulling this together and trying to get messages out to Kiwis who might be in the UK and wider overseas expat Kiwis to vote. So, Meg, I can just only amplify what you said at the start around the need for eligible voters, Kiwis overseas, to vote. The polls are really close. They are on a knife edge, and the thing that is going to win it now will be turnout. I think the arguments have been made from both sides, and it's all going to be about turnout. I think it's yeah. So the Drug Foundation, has found itself in quite an interesting position on the referendum. Most usually, before the referendum came along, we are one of those organisations that, a non-government organisation that would look at evidence and science and try to advise government agencies about better ways of doing policy, law, and running services. But when the referendum came along, we found ourselves in quite an uncomfortable position, because we are that kind of, on the one hand this and on the other hand that. We found ourselves in quite an uncomfortable position that we decided that we would advocate quite strongly for a yes position, and so it's put us really kind of into political campaign mode, and that hasn't been without its challenges. So we have been pushing really strongly for a yes vote because of the science that Meg and Steve has kind of outlined. The fact that our current law isn't doing the thing it was meant to do. So we have been out there running a campaign to encourage a yes vote, and working with a whole lot of allies who are also running yes campaigns. I think the question that Meg had put to us in an email was, what do I think the impact of the law will be on New Zealand? And I think there'll be two impacts. There'll be very little impact at all, and secondly, very profound impacts. When I mean very little, I don't think once we vote yes and legalise and regulate cannabis, I don't think people will notice any difference. People who use cannabis will keep using cannabis. People who don't use cannabis will continue to not use cannabis. Looking at what's happened in jurisdictions in the US, and there's more and more states who are moving in this direction, and what's happened in Canada, is that the sky doesn't fall in, usage doesn't get out of control, potential risks around road safety or workplace issues aren't borne out. The fears that people have around legalisation are not realised. So for most people, there won't be any difference. The world will continue to be a lovely place, relatively COVID-free, I might say, in New Zealand. There's something to be said for listening to public health advice. Because I guess the other thing, our government has done quite well listening to public health advice. So I hope, we carry on that tradition of listening to expertise. But the second impact for legalisation will be felt very profoundly by many people. And Steve, touched on this. The people who will benefit most from legalisation are marginalised communities, young people and Māori, who are currently quite punished, who carry the burden of punishment, I might say, for cannabis offences. There's almost 600,000. There's not many of us in New Zealand, so the numbers may not sound much to you all, but there's about 15% of the population, or 600,000 New Zealanders, adult New Zealanders, who choose to use cannabis. But those people aren't convicted. 80% of people have tried cannabis, but we're not criminalising and punishing and chasing down a vast proportion of the population who've used cannabis. There are thousands of convictions, but they are amongst young, those convictions are carried by young people and Māori. And so I think the social justice benefits of legalisation cannot be underestimated, should not be underestimated. You know, it's so unfair that as a society we allow that burden of punishment, well, a burden that most of us should be carrying because, you know, a lot of us have used cannabis. It's wrong for us to allow that burden to be carried by other people. And so there will be very profound effects from the police no longer being able to chase down young people and Māori. There will also be profound effects, but maybe not noticeable for many people in the fact that we will be treating this as a health, not a criminal issue. We will be putting resources, you know, very precious taxpayer resources into health and into prevention services, drug education, into harm reduction, and into treatment, and no longer, you know, asking police to spend a lot of resources on chasing people down. And I think as a community, we will notice that ultimately over time, as Canada has found, that as they invest more into talking to young people about the harms of cannabis, they've got benefit from that. And so I think over time, we will see the quite profound impacts of putting resources into the health side of this and not into the law enforcement side. I think we'll see some quite profound impacts more broadly around how the country views drug issues. And I think Portugal is a good example of this. Shifting away from that punishment approach to a health approach shifts the whole tone. It shifts the vibe around drug issues. And we see people, you know, we don't see people as wrong or evil or bad who need punishment. We shift the thinking. We start removing the barriers of fear. People will find it easier to ask for help if they need it. And I think that will ultimately have a profound shift, you know, effect on those families who are really struggling with not just cannabis issues, but wider drug issues. And it's going to have a profound effect on those many tens of thousands of adults who enjoy cannabis, who will be able to go into a very modest store and purchase a product without having to go to, you know, the criminal market to get that. And I think that's quite profound as well. There's the fear, the risks that you're going to be, you know, sorry, we don't have cannabis today, but here's some methamphetamine, you know, separating out, you know, the cannabis market from other drugs, I think, you know, will have benefit. So for those, you know, so there's kind of not that I always argue this, it's not an argument that public health folks often make or need to make, but the freedom and autonomy for adults who making an adult choice about cannabis use, the ability for them to buy it without getting it from bad people and without all of those risks, but getting a product that they know what's in it, they know what the potency is, they know what the effects are, getting some, you know, health, or not health advice, but sort of some consumer advice from the retailer. All of that will be quite profound for them as well. So the sky won't fall in, and there's going to be a lot of benefit for a lot of people. And one of the messages that we're pushing at the moment to undecided voters is to think about voting, making a yes vote on behalf of someone else. So while you might not be a cannabis user or you're unlikely to face a conviction because you're European, think about casting your vote for those people who right now are heavily impacted by our law. So hang on, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.